No Lamont Butler. Still no Kirk Kriisa. Just 2 minutes of Andrew Carr on the road in Knoxville. That's a recipe for disaster, right? Not so fast.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Happy Wednesday lunchtime to you all. It's the only daily national college hoop show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shea. This is our guy, Leaf Tulane, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you so much for making us your first listen or watch. And we want to remind you that you can catch literally every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to all you everydayers and all the members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord. If you haven't checked it out yet, make sure you check out Saturday night Locked On College Basketball Game Night, hosted by our guy Leaf Tulane. We are multiple weeks into this thing now, and you're going to want to make sure to not miss out. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers, you can bet $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to the website, FanDuel.com, today to get started. Coming up on the show today, Leaf, we got a lot of Bluegrass State talk. Louisville just continues to truck people, man. Are they the second best team in the ACC? We're going to have a conversation about that. We've got a nice little Wednesday slate, including Alabama being back in action for the first time since Mark Sears was benched for the second half over the weekend. So we'll see how he's going to respond to that. But Lee, I feel like there's literally no other place than we can start than in Knoxville, Tennessee, where Kentucky goes on the road and wins 78-73. No Lamont Butler. Obviously still no Kirk Kriisa. Poor Andrew Carr is back. He only plays 2 minutes in this thing. And yet the Wildcats take care of business. How'd they pull it off?
Well, they're able to score in a multitude of ways. We talk about it all the time as a pro and a con, that they don't have a guy who is the lead dog, but they do have a bunch of guys who can score. And so while they're missing players, it forces other players to step up. Koby Brea didn't miss a shot, which obviously helped. And when he starts shooting well, it really changes everything because you have to stretch your defense tremendously. But the reason that they were able to win, I think, is more an indictment on Tennessee than even a positive for Kentucky. Tennessee,
which is not to take anything away from Kentucky, by the way.
Yeah, it's not to take anything away, but Tennessee does not score well. They simply don't. And everyone was talking about Chaz Lanier as a first-team All-American, and I don't think he's first-team All-SEC. Like, I'm going to say that. Then I don't think he's a lock for second team. But this is not all a hey, Chaz Lanier's not very good, but he's just not Dalton Knecht. And Dalton Knecht's the only player who's been able to elevate Rick Barnes' teams to the point where they are on the precipice of a Final Four because he was that individually gifted offensively. The rest of the teams have been, I'm going to beat you up, and if we make a few shots, we can win. But Kentucky is very different. They have a recipe of we can find a way to score against anyone. So if you can score against Tennessee, even if it's at Tennessee, you're probably going to have a good chance to win because Tennessee is not geared to win a shootout. This wasn't what I'd call a shootout, but Tennessee can't enforce your will on a team that's just knocking down threes at the rate that Kentucky was. They shot well, so that makes it possible. But I actually wasn't all that bothered that Lamont Butler was out as I would be if they were playing Alabama, as I would be if they were playing an Auburn, because those are the type of teams that, hey, you need someone to defend their guards. You need someone to lock up. And I think Zakai Ziegler is a good guard, but I think Lamont Butler's better. But I think Lamont Butler matters more in terms of defense for Kentucky than he does for his offense. Against Gonzaga, you didn't have Lamont Butler, you didn't have Kirk Kriisa, and Jackson Robinson played the point guard. So against teams that need you to score, I think Kentucky can win any game. You just need to score against Tennessee to be able to compete. You need to be able to not let them bog you down in the half court and make it a rock fight. Like, for instance, Auburn is well equipped to handle that rock fight that we saw, but they played not very well. They shot absolutely terribly. Credit to Tennessee's defense. Tennessee played great defense, but good offense beats great defense right now. And you're going to see a great offensive performance from Kentucky, and it gives them a chance because Tennessee doesn't have the ammunition to blow you out of the water when you are shorthanded. It took everything they had in Kentucky, and Kentucky's not perfectly consistent because entering that game, they were 80th in KenPom defensively. But I just think the recipe for Kentucky is one that bothers Tennessee, and Tennessee's recipe for success is tenuous because it relies on you not scoring because they don't score well.
Big picture now, Kentucky has 4 top 10 wins this season, Leaf. If I've done my research and homework correctly, I believe that's the most in the nation over top 10 teams, and they have 6 top 15 wins in the nation. I mean, it's just crazy stuff what Mark Pope has done in year one. I talked about this the other day, but I want to make sure that we're never moving the goalposts with Kentucky. Like preseason, it was like, they'll probably be fine. They'll make the tournament, but I didn't see this level. And what a nice and probably important win for Kentucky to get. I mean, I remember talking this weekend about, look, the Wildcats have dropped 2 in a row, home to Alabama and then at Vandy. The problem is you can't drop a road game that you have to win, like that game at Vandy, especially when you got to go to Tennessee next. And so that was an issue. And I legitimately, I was like, yes, Kentucky will stay within the number because 10 was way too big for this game. But I hand up, did not think Kentucky would win this basketball game. So very good on them. And for me, it was about the defense. The Kentucky defense has not been good enough. So whether it was about Kentucky's defense or Tennessee's offense, in truth, I think it was a combination of the two. I think Kentucky played better defensively on Tuesday night. They were able to get this done. Leaf, on the Tennessee side of things really quickly, Zakai Ziegler, we had a scary moment where he went down in the first half, looked like pretty brutal knee injury, if we're being honest. He kind of hobbles off, and I was like, man, I don't know. Is he going to return to this game in the second half? And not only did he return to the game in the second half, but he played literally the entire second half, all 20 minutes. What a warrior that young man is. Crazy stuff, but hopefully he's going to be okay going forward, because obviously he, in so many ways, is the straw that stirs Tennessee's drink. Now, instead of a Kentucky 3-game losing streak, Leaf, where's Tennessee at? Because now they're number 8 in the nation, but they're 4-4 in the SEC, and they got Florida coming to town on Saturday.
I have been a pessimist about Tennessee's prospects the entire year, as you know. But the real issue is that when a team can take away Chaz Lanier on the catch, and he actually shot well and he made shots, but I think that was because of no Lamont Butler. It made Otega Away defend differently than he would have. But my long story short about Tennessee is, as Chaz Lanier goes, that's how Tennessee's going to go, because they just don't have enough offensively oriented players. So the pressure's so on him. And the other player who in SEC play, whose numbers have dropped drastically, is Igor Milicic. So 2 transfers in that really hold the hopes and dreams of Tennessee by their performances. And both of them have, I wouldn't say been terrible in SEC play, but they were number 1 in the country coming into SEC play because of their performances. And they haven't been the same players that they have that they were at that point in SEC play, which is somewhat to be expected. But the drop off has been fairly drastic. And it's because of they're not the guys that Connect was, or some of these guys in SEC play who can manufacture points in their sleep. They're system players that were playing very well, and now they're known commodities. So I think I picked Tennessee 4th in the preseason, and my issue in the SEC, that is, and my issue with Tennessee is becoming worse because as teams figure out what Lanier prefers to do, he doesn't put the ball on the floor very well. And Milicic is forced to shoot a lot of threes, and I think teams are letting him shoot them because he was shooting well, but he was shooting about 31% last I checked, and that's not going to move the needle.
No. And Milicic had a really nice game. I mean, he was Tennessee's best offensive player on Tuesday night. Was 6 of 10 from the field. He had 19 points. But curiously, like late game, Coach Barnes didn't have him on the floor for a critical offensive possession. That was weird to me. And look, very much credit to Kentucky because they just kept holding off Tennessee down the stretch. They made the plays they needed to. But like on Tennessee's last meaningful possession, it felt like they couldn't decide if they wanted to shoot a game-tying 3 or if they wanted to just get a quick 2 and foul again. It was like, y'all got to figure these things out. And even with somebody's experiences as Zakai Ziegler out there leading the charge, I didn't think they had what it took down the stretch. Some encouraging signs for Kentucky is so many we've talked, and you referenced this earlier about like, who's the dude for Kentucky? In some ways, for me, Leaf, Otega Oweh is emerging as that when he needs to be. Not in a like, I'm the dude that's going to go get a bucket all the time, but like the dude that's like, I'm out here, I'm going to be a leader and help this team really go. That dunk he had and then landed. I was so worried that he had like popped his shoulder out of socket or something, but then he just kept going. So when I say dude, I don't mean it in like a Rob Dillingham, just go get every bucket in the book sort of way. I mean it in like, he's a warrior that I can count on game in and game out and can really help lead this team. But then you got, other guys doing so much. What a night for Amari Williams on the boards, 15 rebounds. Ansley Almanor, like preseason, if you had asked me, hey, Isaac, Ansley Almanor is going to be a starter when Kentucky goes to Knoxville, I would have said it's not going very well for Kentucky. But there he is in the starting lineup, and things are okay. So really encouraged for Mark Pope's club in this thing. And Tennessee, man, they got to get some stuff figured out because they could easily lose to Florida this weekend. As for Kentucky, hopefully this means turning a little bit of a leaf here. And obviously the big game upcoming on Saturday, Coach Cal is coming to Rupp. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Leaf very quickly elsewhere in the SEC, just 2 other games on Tuesday night. Texas A&M wins at home 75-68 over Oklahoma, and Georgia wins at home 71-60 over South Carolina. So we've still got Auburn at the top of the heap, 6-0, followed by Alabama at 6-1. And then Florida and Mizzou both have 2 losses, and then it goes down from there. So really curious to see how things continue to go in the nation's best conference. Leaf, we got to go elsewhere in the Bluegrass State because Louisville, my goodness, they are doing things that if we had said this time last year, hey, guess what? Louisville's going to be the second best team in the ACC. You would have laughed at me, Leaf. I would have laughed at me for saying that, but now they legitimately might be. Are they the second best team in the ACC, or is it someone else? Leaf and I'll have that conversation and more in just a second. Right after I tell you about our friends at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. So whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from the kickoff to the final minute. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, man, that is some icing on the cake. We just talked about the SEC. Go check out the lines for SEC regular season champion odds at FanDuel. It's crazy to see where everyone's at on that. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet $5, and if you win, you'll get scored $200 in bonus bets at FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, Leaf, let's stay in the Bluegrass State where Louisville on Tuesday night was hosting Wake Forest. Wake Forest is another one of the ACC preseason frontrunners. They've been playing a lot better lately, but Louisville wins this game 72-59. And Leaf, that seems like, all right, that's a fine margin. But really, truly, Louisville trucked Wake Forest. This game was a 29-point margin with like 14:30 to go in the second half. And then, Wake just whittles away at it down the stretch. Fine, whatever. I don't care about that. First off, let's just have a conversation about this game in particular. Leaf, like with Wake coming in, it's like, okay, we want to rise up with the Louisville, the Clemson, and be in the top tier of the ACC. And Louisville just thwarts that. Why did Pat Kelsey's Cards have this game handled so well?
They're significantly better offensively than Wake. And while I didn't expect this outcome, I mean, the end score was kind of, you know what, that's okay. But you look at the game at halftime, and it was a absolute blowout. Louisville's playing some of the best basketball in the country right now. I don't think they have the ceilings of like the top teams.
Yep, that's
but
good
the
word.
Basketball they're playing currently is as good as anyone else's because they're moving the ball. They're shooting spectacularly, which obviously helps. Rain Smith hit 10 threes on Saturday.
He's crazy.
I mean, if you're hitting 10 threes on a one day, and then here we are the next couple
4
days.
of 10 for him. Yep.
Yeah, he's knocking down 4+ each of his last couple games. And his spacing, his gravity really opens up the driving lanes for those geared to do that. So you have Edwards, who I thought was going to be their best player, going to the rim, and it opens up the floor. And then you have an all-ACC performer. Their best actual player is Chucky Hepburn. But the reason that I lead with the other two is when the other two are playing well, Chucky Hepburn can do what he actually does best, which is defend the ball and facilitate instead of having to score. And I think the role definition that Louisville is starting to create, and then they have a few big guys that are emerging in terms of they're not super productive, but they're figuring out their roles. They're catching the ball in the pick and roll, playing good defense, that they're figuring out their role definition. And they've gotten better.
James Scott, man, he is an uber athlete. You don't want to mess with him. I mean, literally perfect from the floor, by the way, on Tuesday night. 4 of 4, 8 points, 8 boards, a block and an assist. Great stuff from him there. And it's just, we talked about who Kentucky was missing. It's the same kind of thing for Louisville. They've had injury issues. I thought when Kason Pryor went down earlier this season, I was like, I thought Louisville might be able to be a tournament team, but okay, we'll see what good grief. They have not only been okay, they have thrived since then. And I don't think that's a negative on Kason Pryor. I think it's a positive about this team. I love your point about role definition, because that's so critically important for, in particular, this day and age. Like, the teams that succeed are the ones that put their roster together most capably. And then the teams where the players are not only aware of what those roles are, but accept them and lean into them. And that's what Louisville is doing so well. I mean, it's just wildly impressive. And I think Chucky Hepburn is delivering more than perhaps we ever thought he would do. It's wildly impressive. So all of that said about Louisville, then, Leaf, it's similar to the conversation we had last year with National Player of the Year, where it was like, okay, obviously the endpoint is going to be Zach Edey, but let's have a conversation about who's number 2. Is it Mark Sears? Is it RJ Davis? Is it Dalton Connect? If you take Zach Edey out of the equation, who's number 2? So we got to do the same thing here. Obviously, Duke is the far and away best team in the ACC right now, but take the Blue Devils out of the equation. Who's number 2 in the ACC? Is it Louisville, or is it somebody we're missing?
Oh yeah, it's Louisville for sure. I don't think it's close, because I actually came into the season. I found a tweet that I tagged you and Andy in before the season. Said, I got 5 teams I'm higher on than the AP poll. I said Duke's better than number 6. I had Gonzaga, so I can't remember if they were 6 or 7. I said Gonzaga or Duke are better than 6 and 7. So I'm 1 for 2 there. Texas Tech will be a Sweet 16 caliber team, top 5 Big 12 easily. So I think that's going to happen. High on Xavier, high on Oregon, and then I said Louisville, not rated, should be rated. Top 3 in the ACC. And I think I was low. I think they're top 2 in the ACC, because North Carolina, who was my number 2, I found another tweet and I ranked out all the conferences, and North Carolina was my 2. But that was out of deference to what they returned. But my big concern about North Carolina, which I had lower than where they were ranked in the AP poll, was their front court play. But I didn't realize how drastic the drop-off was from Armando Bacot to what they're getting right now.
And Jalen Washington didn't even play on Tuesday night. He was out, and that made it even worse.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is they're losing to teams that are just joining the ACC in the Dean Dome, like my Stanford Cardinal. They're losing games to teams and then having to pull off miracles to beat Boston College, who are in the bottom of the ACC. So I don't think it's particularly close. I think their roster, so that was based off rosters. And the reason I bring that up is the roster, to me, for Louisville, if they could find role definition, was top 3 to begin with. They found role definition, and they found a way to play well together, because there's a lot of on-ball guys, like Rain Smith had the ball at Charleston. Chucky Hepburn had the ball at Wisconsin. James Madison Edwards had the ball. So now they found out how to play together, and I think all the pieces have clicked, and I actually believe they could make a Sweet 16. Like, Louisville's goal was to make the tournament, and that would have been like icing on the cake after all the terrible seasons they went through with Kenny Payne. Pat Kelsey probably wins National Coach of the Year. And
I wish he would hang on. I would love for Pat Kelsey to win National Player of the Year, Leaf. That would be great if that could happen.
Too. I mean, talk about an underdog right there. But I think he wins National Coach of the Year, and they're a team that I believe can make a Sweet 16. I'm not going to say I believe it full hearted.
It'll be matchup dependent,
but it's matchup dependent, because they're a tricky team. But like, I don't think any other team in the ACC is capable of making the Sweet 16 aside from Duke.
No, I don't think so either. The only one I'd consider is Clemson, or maybe
Clemson might. Yeah,
I was gonna say Clemson, and dependent on if Hunter Shallis can get going, but some of that is, Wake? I don't know. We'll see.
They don't score easily enough. Yeah. I don't think.
Yeah. Crazy stuff. Well, Leaf, elsewhere in the ACC last night, we had Notre Dame winning at home 71-68 over Georgia Tech. Marcus Burton is such a dude, 26 points for him. And look, February 1st is when we allow ourselves to start having bubble conversations, but I think we got to here just very briefly. North Carolina at Pittsburgh. I think it was a very bubbly game on Tuesday night. Pitt wins at home 73-65 over the North Carolina Tar Heels, who are fading very fastly. So we'll keep our eyes on that, of course, ahead of the first Duke North Carolina game coming up this Saturday. Leaf, a couple other top 25 games that took place on Tuesday night. St. John's won easily at Georgetown 66-41. The Johnnies are now 9-1 in Big East play. Best conference start for them since 84-85. Marquette wins at Butler. Kansas survives at home against UCF after obliterating UCF down in Orlando earlier this year. Leaf, as for the Big East, we just talked about Louisville as the second best Big East team. With what's happening with UConn. UConn has DePaul tonight. They should be fine, but then they got a stretch that includes Creighton, St. John's, and Marquette right after that. So we'll learn more about UConn. But as for St. John's, do you think this is legit? Like, are they in your mind now the Big East front runner?
I think they'll probably win it. I think I'd have to look at the schedules. And
schedule is going to matter, right? Yep.
Yeah, I'd have to see how many times they play UConn and Marquette, and if they go on the road to a tricky team. But they already lost at Creighton, so maybe I do think they have a path to win the Big East. I still hesitate to say they have the highest ceiling. I think the highest ceiling still is UConn if healthy, and Liam McNeely plays, because he elevates their team significantly. Yep. And right now they're just surviving. I don't like betting against Pitino.
I don't either. He's such a good coach.
It's the same thing. It's a little bit different. But when Chris Beard comes back to Ole Miss and they make the top 25, I said, there's some things that he's done that are reprehensible, but the basketball resume speaks for itself. Rick Pitino, when he was ousted from Louisville and he went to St. John's and, he had his little hiatus and he was at Iona and he was in the middle of nowhere. Well, you know who played UConn the best in their first run to the national championship? It was Iona. It's like, you don't think about any of this stuff. Rick Pitino, in my opinion, might be still the best basketball coach in college basketball. And, I know Dan Hurley believes that's himself and he has every right to, but Rick Pitino.
And he lets officials know about it, by the way.
But Dan Hurley's got Rick Pitino's got every accolade in the book you could be looking for, and his team has talent. It's not like he's making this masterpiece work, but they're not perfectly suited to play with one another. I don't think the team role definition wise is great, but look, they're succeeding. They're playing Rick Pitino style basketball, and he's made the project of St. John's from kind of a cellar dweller all the way to the top of the Big East. So I think they're a Sweet 16 team if everything goes right. But that's the crazy thing, is you would not have thought Rick Pitino could make that turnaround, and here it is. And honestly, if they get to the Sweet 16 and Rick Pitino's coaching, I won't be picking against the Johnnies.
Yeah, man. Well, to your point about the schedule, they are going to have to prove it if they're going to win the Big East. They've still got to play both Marquette and UConn home and home. They've still got their home game against Creighton. And so, at least those 5 games, very difficult, but they are projected, at least at KenPom, to win every game except their regular season finale at Marquette, where they're a 3-point underdog. So whether it is them, Marquette, UConn, it's going to be fun to watch this Big East race unfold. We're a bit short on time, so I'll tell you what, we're going to get to our break. I'd like to just say, Kansas, what's up? And then we'll look ahead to Wednesday night's action. All of that coming up here in just a second. Leaf, Kansas hosted UCF on Tuesday night. No DeJuan Harris. That's key and critical for this game. Jayhawks do end up winning 91-87. UCF's up at the half, 43-41. Just another game where Kansas has some struggles at home, right? They lost the kind of wild, miraculous game Saturday night at home against Houston. I know you talked about that at great length on game night on Saturday. But Kansas had obliterated UCF at home earlier this year. I meant to go look, have the score pulled up because it was so wild how big a margin it was. 99-48. But then in Fog Allen Fieldhouse Tuesday night, just a 4-point final margin. Is DeJuan Harris that big a deal with him being out, or is this just Kansas has some struggles this year and is not the dominant preseason number 1 team we thought they would be?
Yeah, their team is really struggling. And for a team that has all the talent that they had coming in, a lot of what we thought would need to happen was, hey, get players to accept their roles. Maybe not, thrive in them. And AJ Storr was second team all Big Ten last year, scored 16 a game. Rylan Griffin seemed to slot into a normal role. Zeke Mayo comes out of nowhere. We thought he was coming off the bench, but he's been their best transfer. Flory Badunga may have unseated KJ Adams, who, he was the guy like, oh, he's going to start and he's going to get better. He's going to play alongside Dickinson. And there's been a lot of talk about how KJ Adams and DeJuan Harris have really struggled because Dickinson is going to post up, and that's great. But those two guys who have been mainstays, who have won national championships in the case of DeJuan Harris, you look at that, and they're the ones getting a lot of the turmoil because they don't shoot well. So who's going to shoot well? No one has. So I'm not really high on Kansas right now. At the same time, I think if they figure it out, they have all the pieces to be a team that's really dangerous, but they've struggled dramatically. Like I could not have anticipated this deep of a dive from Kansas. And I understand they're still ranked. They're still a team that's difficult to beat, and they should have beaten Houston. And maybe we talk about them so differently, but that loss feels indicative of how the season's gone. Like they should be better. They finally put it together and they still lose. And I just don't think you're seeing a team with the culture that can win a championship, even though Kansas was ranked number one. And I think for good reason, they had a really talented bunch.
Yeah. And, KJ Adams was back in this game. He came off the bench. Is that he didn't play Saturday. So is that a function of, as you said, has Badunga supplanted him, which I love what Badunga brings to this team. Had a double in this game in how many minutes was it? 29 minutes that he played. I think he brings a dynamic that this team is really going to need. I've got it pulled up here. Badunga, 10 points, 11 boards in 29 minutes. Yeah. And so we'll see what happens there. Got to get DeJuan Harris back and healthy. It's more important to have him resting now and ready to go because his floor leadership is so important for this team. Elsewhere in the Big 12 on Tuesday night, Baylor falls at BYU in overtime, 93-89. Cincinnati's descent continues. Good grief, man. They lose at Utah, 69-66. Cincinnati now 2-7 in Big 12 play. I think they're being exposed in the way that you, quite frankly, Leaf, expected them to be. Let's turn our attention now to Wednesday night. And Wednesday night's going to be a lot of fun. We've got several great matchups coming, but we've got one ranked matchup. Number 4, Alabama at number 14, Mississippi State, 9 p.m. tonight on SEC Network. Leaf, for those who missed it, on Saturday, Mark Sears did not play the second half. He wasn't hurt. It seems like from the beating around the bush from Coach Oates that he wasn't given enough defensively. How do you let me give you like an over-under here. Mark Sears over under 23 points tonight. Over under 2 floor burns as well.
The hard part is points that are hard to come by at times, but I'll go over. I thought you were going to say minutes, and it would have been higher than 23, but I think he'll come out motivated. Last time that Mark Sears had 0 points, it was against Illinois, I want to say, and they won the game, and then they came out the next game. And the question was Mark Sears not very good this year? Is LeBaron Philon significantly better? All this stuff. And then Mark Sears, the next 6 games, played like an All-American. So I think this is motivation. I don't know how I feel about it in terms of the long-term effect of it. Like the willingness to pull a guy like Sears doesn't typically sit well with a team if their best player is pulled like that. But maybe it does. Maybe they have a good enough relationship. I think Mark Sears is going to come out, play very well. It'll be an interesting game because Mississippi State's kind of been up and down. They eked out an overtime win, both of their last 2 wins, I believe, where they beat Ole Miss in overtime in a thriller, and they beat South Carolina in overtime. So they have not been convincing, but they really need some of these wins to stamp their legitimacy as a top 8 level seed in the NCAA tournament, because the SEC is brutal and they're going to lose a lot of road games. So you got to beat some good home teams when they come to Starkville. So I think this will be a really interesting game, and Mark Sears kind of controls the reins.
Yes, Leaf, you're right. In Mississippi State's last 5 games, they have 3 losses and 2 overtime wins, at home over Ole Miss and then at South Carolina. So we're going to learn a good bit tonight as we continue to see that. Elsewhere in other ranked action tonight, number 1 Auburn is on the road at LSU. Their first action since that absolute street fight against Tennessee on Saturday. 6 Houston is at West Virginia. This is a really interesting game to see how Houston responds to their win at Kansas. Now going to West Virginia, who's got some big-time wins this year. How will that go? Perhaps the game I'm most intrigued by is number 17 Wisconsin at Maryland. Maryland's coming along a little bit. Love Derek Queen and everything he brings. TCU at number 22 Texas Tech. I'm telling you, Red Raiders are flying under the radar right now, but this offense has found something. DePaul going to UConn, if they want to do something hilarious, that would be the thing to do. And then the final ranked matchup tonight, Texas is at number 23, Ole Miss, 9 p.m. on ESPN2. Leaf, out of those games, what are you most intrigued by?
Quickly, I really like Texas Tech. I mentioned they were a team I was high on before the season, so I mean maybe biased there, but they're top 10 KenPom. Like they're really flying under the radar. So I agree with that. Alabama game is probably the one I'm looking forward to the most. And then of the ones there, I am curious to see the legitimacy of some of these Big Ten teams. Like I don't think Wisconsin's great at number 17 in the country, but I also at the same time think the Big Ten's pretty equal. They're on equal footing because I don't see too much of a difference between them and Maryland. And that's, I guess, the point of why they're, they got a lot of good teams, but no one great. So I want to see that game. Honestly, I'll be watching all of them. So I like a lot of these games. I also am curious to see if Texas can keep up a little bit of a hot streak because Trey Johnson's been playing great, but Ole Miss desperately needs a win too.
To your point about that Big Ten game, Maryland is actually a 4.5 point favorite at FanDuel, as you would expect them to be the favorite in this game. And so obviously by top 25, they're an underdog, but understandably that line gives Maryland the chance to be a favorite there. Most of the rest of the, are on the road as well, but you got several other ranked teams at home. So Leaf going to be a great night of games. Really looking forward to it, and we'll see what happens if there's any upsets or anything else happening. Another interesting Big East game that is not ranked, neither team is ranked, but Xavier at Creighton. Really just Xavier's had some moments. Creighton's been coming along lately, really moving up, and so I'm pretty curious with that as my game with no ranked teams in it of the night.
And they play fun, inspiring styles of basketball, so I think that'll be a fun game. Creighton has been playing significantly better. Of course, Kalkbrenner plays the drop coverage. That gives them their defensive anchor. He and Ashworth are both scoring around 17 a game, and they're both Big East caliber, all Big East caliber players. And Xavier has been so close in so many games. If Xavier wins half of their close games instead of being 1-6, they're probably ranked in the top 25 and are seen as one of the best teams in the Big East. Instead, they've lost a ton of those games, and they're fighting tooth and nail with injuries to try to find a way into the bubble. And this is a huge game. I think Creighton's the better team, but it's a really weird matchup.
Yep. Creighton has won 5 in a row, 7 of their last 8. And as for Xavier, they have won 4 of their last 5, the lone loss being to St. John's. And so this is a big opportunity for the Musketeers on the road.
Won that game at St. John's.
Yes, they absolutely should have. That ended up, if you box score it, St. John's won by 8, but it was an overtime game that Xavier really should have won. In fact, St. John's is each of their last 2 losses, so that's tough. And so we'll see what happens. Guys, thanks so much for hanging out with us. I will be hosting tomorrow's show, so make sure to tune in. That will be up in your feeds on Thursday morning. I know Mark Zanetto from Locked On UConn is going to join me to not really unpack the UConn DePaul game because it shouldn't be a game, but we're going to talk about this upcoming 3-game stretch that UConn has and what's going on with Dan Hurley and all of his usual antics. So we'll have all of that coming up tomorrow, plus reactions to all of the rest of Wednesday night's biggest games. So thank you so much for hanging out with Leaf and I today. If you've not subscribed to the show on video and audio, go ahead and do that right now so you don't miss a second of Locked On College Basketball. If you've not joined the Locked On College Basketball Discord, we'd love to have you there. We're talking hoops all day long. That's free to join in the links in the show notes. All right, folks, as always, apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes, and shouts to our guy, Mick Bruins. But until tomorrow, peace.